So, culture in New England is family based, and we have a society that values education. They want their children to read the Bible, and it's extremely important for their children to be able to read and write. So, a literate society in New England, the most northern of our British American colonies. And these New Englanders also, being as they value education, they're going to make up a real, like, they have a solid middle class, which is unique. They have merchants and bankers and lawyers and doctors, and a skilled middle class. So New Englanders are distinct in their society and in their culture. They're much different than the British American colonists that live farther south. Okay, but here's a unique thing about the New Englanders. They come into the Americas, many of them as a result of persecution because of religious intolerance in the Old World in Europe. Well, the persecuted becomes the persecutor. New Englanders had developed a society where it was ultimately a theocracy, meaning that the law of the church or the rules of the church became the law of the land. And people, anyone who disagreed with like official church doctrine and teaching would be open to persecution. And so Roger Williams is an example of one of these individuals who disagreed with the doctrine of the church. He believed in a concept called freedom of religion. Now, he doesn't believe that you should be able to, practice Judaism or practice Islam, but he does believe that Christians ought to have the freedom to pursue whatever denomination and doctrinal teachings that they would like. So his philosophy is the government or the state should not have a declared position of Protestant or Catholic. So within the larger context of this Protestant Reformation, he thinks that the government should stay out of that. Okay, so that's going to be a problem for Roger Williams. Not only does that put him at odds with church leaders, not wanting the church law to be the community law, but he also takes issue with how the leaders in Massachusetts deal with Indians, particularly the Narragansett Indians. He said they're not dealing with him fairly in land deals. He believes that if they were buying land from a white man, they would not swindle and cheat and try and negotiate for a very low and like below market value for land. So he calls out church leaders about being dishonest in their dealings with Indians. Roger Williams is eventually he is exiled from Massachusetts, and he goes into Providence, like it's God's will, it's Providence, and he starts a new community there that eventually becomes the larger colony of Rhode Island. So Protestant Rhode Island is founded by Roger Williams, who was a dissenter. And this is interesting because the Rhode Island covenant of like agreement to form their government there, of course, they within it there's a law that protects freedom of religious choice for Christians, not for anyone. So that's interesting. And then Anne Hutchinson is another dissenter. She disagrees with the official church doctrine. As a woman, she begins to teach, and she believes that there should be more flexibility for personal interpretation of scripture. She holds Bible studies in her home. She gets in trouble with the leaders of Massachusetts. They kick her out. She goes into Rhode Island because this is a new colony established now for other individuals to travel. So we see that New England turns into a much larger area, eventually becoming 3 colonies: Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. So New Englanders started out having a pretty good relationship with Indians. What are they? What are their relationships like with Indians as we enter into the 1630s and so on into the century? Well, their relationships with Indians sour. Why? Land. The more Europeans that come into New England, the farther they encroach into native territory, and it's going to result in conflict. So the Pequot Wars is an example of one of those conflicts over land disputes in the Connecticut Valley. The white settlers keep encroaching on Indian land, and the Indians fire that they retaliate. And the end of the Pequot War is kind of, here's an image here. What white settlers do is they surround the Pequot village and burn native people inside, and so that kind of represents the end of the Pequot War. There's another important conflict with natives and New Englanders. It's called King Philip's War. New Englanders started to impose their law on Indians. Like there were these two Indian braves who they convicted of murder under New England law. Well, these aren't settlers in their community, and they don't have authority according to native perspective. They don't have the authority to try them in their courts or punish them for some grievance that they have against them. So they killed these, they hanged these two braves, and so Metacomet rallies some tribes together, and they start to sack New England settlements on the western frontier. New England settlers retaliate back against Metacomet, and this is known as King Philip's War. It ends with King Philip. Okay, so let me this is awful. The settlers call Metacomet King Philip, mocking him. They at some point, Metacomet says he wants to meet with the King of England, and they mock him like, "Oh yeah, you want to meet with the King of England, King Philip?" So whenever Metacomet is captured, his head is removed from his body, decapitated, and his head is paraded around on a pike. His wife and children are sold into slavery. So let's finish up these British American colonies by talking here about the middle colonies. The middle colonies are the colonies of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. The Dutch were the first to settle in New York, and they did so because they wanted in on the fur trade. But not a lot of Dutch people came into New York. They called it then the New Netherlands. And they were open to a lot of different people from all over Europe came in, and really even like Africans came in. There were slaves present in New England. So not New England, in New York. So this Dutch colony that was originally called the New Netherlands had a diverse population, and it was more a center of trade. But then in 1664, a British naval fleet comes up the Hudson, and they just take the island of Manhattan from the Dutch, and they change the name from the New Netherlands to New York. So you have the colony of New York. And then a section of that is later given to another proprietor, and it's renamed New Jersey. So you have two different sections, New York and New Jersey. Then the third colony in the middle colonies, Pennsylvania, was established as a religious experiment. William Penn, who was a Quaker, petitioned for land in the New World for a Quaker community. So this is another Christian denomination that has emerged. And they have beliefs that are based on pacifism, like nonviolence. They don't fight. Okay, these people believe in abolition, so no slavery. And the Quakers also believe in a real sense of equality, more so than any other people at their time. They believe that every man should own land, and that women are equal in standing to men. So there's really a sense of cooperation and equality felt within the Quaker community. Like they treat natives with respect. They tolerate any religious group. Jews come into Pennsylvania in large number. The problem with and I say the problem, we'll say the issue is that eventually the Quakers become a minority because they're so tolerant and they're open to people of other faiths and other ethnic backgrounds coming in, other religions coming in. They eventually become outnumbered after about 50 years, and it's going to lead to some conflicts with Indians. But for the first 50 years, they have peaceful relationships with Indians because they treated them very fairly. Okay, what we end up having here is a diverse 13 English or British colonies. In the north, New England, you have Massachusetts, which is today we call it Maine, but that was Massachusetts, and this is the Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Rhode Island. And then you have the middle colonies, New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. Some people consider Delaware a middle colony as well. And then you have the southern colonies of Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, the last of the 13 colonies. Baltimore was established as a safe haven for Catholics, eventually becoming the larger colony of Maryland. All right, that's it.